my name is Niall Richard Murphy. I am the instigator and co-author of 2 books on SRE, and I'm Global Head of Azure SRE.
Hi, I'm Amy Harms, and I'm Head of SRE for SharePoint.
I'm Stephen Fitzmaurice, and I'm an engineering lead in Microsoft News.
Hi, I'm James Walsh. I work as an SRE for SharePoint Online.
So as Jane Austen nearly wrote in Pride and Prejudice and SRE, it is a truth universally acknowledged that systems do not look after themselves, which I think is true every day. Do we have any examples specifically of how software needs to be managed and how SRE can intervene to good effect?
Yep. So something that comes up for us where we've been involved in our service is around performance challenges. So because we're running the service over 100,000 plus servers, a lot of cores, processor cores, small, what maybe look like small changes, a couple of lines of code, can actually cause us to have to provision and spin up thousands more processors to support the extra processing that this code needs. So, for example, recently we've had an issue where there was a change and we had to provision a lot more of web servers to be able to handle the new load which this change brought unforeseenly. So this is where really SRE comes into its own, in my opinion, because we have sort of the end-to-end view of the system. We're the ones who are brought in really and who are there to narrow down the issue. So it's very hard to find 2 lines of code when you're talking about billions of lines of code in the application. So you need teams that are able to look at the system overall, have the right telemetry, have the right monitoring in place, the right tools already developed to quickly home in on this issue. So in this case, SRE we're able to find the part of the code. So we don't profess to be able, always to be able to go in, locate the line, figure out what the change needs to be, but we're able to, in this case, locate where the problem is so that we can engage the correct feature developers who are the experts, subject matter experts in that area to come in. And then we can work with them using our tooling and our profiling to be able to figure out if, change A is made, is that going to be able to improve the situation or not? Overall, the impact of this can be huge to Microsoft. We need to keep the reliability of the service at the same level to meet our SLAs and expectations with the customer. So when we don't know what the issue is, we need to add more capacity to the system to maintain that level of reliability to the customer. So Microsoft needs to, in these cases, experience a lot of extra cost. So this is huge value that we're able to add as SREs. We're able to quickly get in there, make sure that this is just a temporary situation, and that cost can be to Microsoft can be reduced quickly.
I think it was Isaac Asimov who said this. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he said that the most interesting moment in science is not when somebody is deriving an equation perfectly and they get all the terms to balance or whatever it is, but when they look at a graph or a chart and they go, that's funny. I've seen something I don't expect. And in particular, that means that your mental model of the situation and what's actually going on they're not necessarily the same thing. And so there was a moment recently in ARM SRE. ARM stands for Azure Resource Manager, and it's the layer that sits between folks who are trying to, for example, instantiate VMs in Azure and the actual resource providers, they're called, underneath, whose job it is to receive please give me a VM call, okay, here's a VM, and so on. But there was a moment in ARM SRE recently where we looked at a graph of number of requests, as it happens, HTTP requests here, and there's a spike, and the spike is in 404s, which is, as a number of folks would know, is resource not found, or equivalent. Where that's funny, not quite sure what's going on there. And it turns out that accidentally there had been a misconfiguration on a particular thing which is supposed to probe every so often, going, are you there? Everything okay? In a kind of automated cycle. Turns out to be asking for a thing which is in fact no longer there. And so we have a very large number of requests. I won't be hugely specific about this, but a very large number of requests as a result of this accidental misconfiguration. And SREs, chasing this weird behavior of the system down, discovered that it had been in place actually for a period which was longer than you would like, and costing a number of dollars which was greater than zero. And anyway, SRE discovered this, figured out where the source was, corrected the source, and returned capacity and extra performance to the system as a result. So I think that's another example of where we can deliver value, is in making sure that the mental model lies congruent with the actual reality.
Well, we have a similar example. So I like to say you're only as strong as your telemetry or your graphing, as you said. So we had a similar example where we have a content management system, or a CMS, whose underlying storage was located on one Azure offering of storage. So it was the actual Azure vanilla storage, and we wanted to move it onto DocumentDB. And we actually discovered a huge impact to our COGS, our cost of goods sold, because of the partitioning configuration we'd done in DocumentDB. So it basically areas went very hot during the migration, because DocDB's pricing structure is based on these requests and how you partition them. And long story short, without the graphing, and that was we'd done in partnership with our infrastructure folks, we would never have been able to identify that, and it would have only come long after a very long period down the road when the monthly bill comes in. So we were able to identify it very quickly and revert, and then fix the configuration and go forward. So that's what I mean when I was chatting earlier about it's an always-on system. So you're only as strong as your telemetry and graphs underneath, and you can respond in real time to problems as they arise.
Another example, actually, while we're on the topic of partitions, because partitions and resource allocation is always a tricky thing, as many folks who work with computers know. I think a couple of years ago, before I got here anyway, there was a storage problem where customer storage could end up being significantly unbalanced within a cluster, and the SRE team at the time wrote an automatic rebalancer that would look at the capacity versus the customer allocation, I think is probably the right way to put it, and automatically rebalance that, moving storage around so that the cluster as a whole was able to take more customers relatively easily. And also you could decommission half of the cluster, the system would automatically rebalance the storage onto the remaining half, do stuff maintenance there, move it all back, do the other half, and so on.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah, you remind me, Stephen, just as well, and now talking about the importance of telemetry and that, and tooling. A kind of famous or infamous one we had in SharePoint Online a while ago. There had been a change which we found out after basically triggered all the OneDrive sync clients to do a full sync as soon as the user's laptop or PC was turned on. So globally, however many million number of users all started doing full sync. So it's not something that the product's designed for, because it's supposed to be incremental, and every so often then there's a full sync. So it was a Monday morning, I remember it vividly, and everything literally went into meltdown. All our graphs, our front ends, our web front ends. But a couple of years previous, I can see a case where that would have been a really disastrous situation. But there had been a lot of tooling and telemetry put in place, where it actually made it quite easy and quick for us to identify, amidst all the madness of alerting and incidents and bridges spinning up, the source of the problem. and the fact that we were being overwhelmed by this sync traffic and that it was being triggered by a full sync on the sync clients. And because we had that telemetry monitoring in place, it allowed us to identify it, and B, we had the tooling in place as well, which allowed us to quickly absorb that increase, you know, by we knew what the issue was, we knew we couldn't fix it right there and then, so we needed to kind of eat that performance by adding more capacity in the short term. And we were able to bring in the particular feature owners who were able to get that fix out to reverse the issue quickly. So, you know, a very potentially disastrous situation was sort of kept under control by kind of a lot of those core SRE principles that we'd worked on, and were there in place.
I think one of the other interesting things about the SRE model is the partnership model, and how in many ways, if you look at what's happening in the industry with software engineering today, it's pretty clear, at least to me, this is how I'm thinking about it, it's pretty clear that software in production is bifurcating into two kinds of behaviors. And the first one is the set of folks who chase product market fit. And they are generally software engineers, feature developers, and obviously lots of folks, and there's a significant amount of expertise in chasing product market fit in the first place, and you have to be data driven and disciplined and all the rest of that. That is fantastic. Then over here is kind of everything else. And everything else, I think, works best if you look at it through the lens of reliability and helping the product actually deliver stuff to the users in a sustainable way, I guess. I think this probably most reflects itself, or best reflects itself, when the SRE team and the product team have a partnership where the SRE team is helping the product team to go faster, particularly because you'll know by your software development lifecycle that the later on you find a problem, the more costly it is to fix, and in particular the more time it takes to fix, those two things being very closely related. And so the earlier you can push problem discovery, resolution, good design, all of those disciplines, the earlier you can push, the less time you waste in resolution, and the faster you go as a unit.
I often say that one of the things that we're trying to do is, because SharePoint has had a very interesting sort of, evolution as a product. It started more than 20 years ago as an on-prem package solution, and it now, we still have a few on-prem customers, but we're radically moving into the cloud, and most of our customer base is in the cloud. And so what's interesting for us is that, we've gone from a product that had almost a flat feedback loop, as in the loop had been cut and there was no feedback, or very little feedback, or all of that feedback was sort of people oriented, like someone would make a complaint or someone would tell a story or someone would have a bad experience. But what we've done in moving to the cloud is we've actually joined the feedback loop back together. And when we first got to the cloud, that loop was actually quite large. It took a long time for these things to kind of come around and all, because we were effectively just operating an on-prem package in the cloud. But now it's actually really become a cloud service, and what we're doing, from a conceptual point of view, is just trying to tighten that feedback loop so that it's as small as possible, so that all these things are kind of happening almost in unison rather than in some kind of chronological order.
All happening at once, that's the way I like it.
It's actually something else that's, is a great opportunity and challenge for us with, especially in Microsoft, where we have these box products, that have been around for a long time and have been adopted by a lot of enterprise customers. And now, in the last couple of years, these are all moving towards the cloud version of the service. But, at the core, a lot of the software is the same, but it has to evolve to be able to go from, just being deployed in one company at a certain smaller scale to a cloud version, which is obviously huge planet scale,
multi-tenant,
and finding all these, bottlenecks or whatever that are being exposed at this scale, and you know, it's great to be able to work as an SRE with the people who have been there in some cases from very close to the beginning of the box product and going and figuring out, you know, okay, well, that used to work when it was deployed like that, but now we have all this new set of challenges and opportunities to work on. So it's great to kind of go through that retrofitting of the product delivered to the new reality.
Yeah, and I think that it teases out a key principle I find with SREs is that in the world where you want to move to this, people expect the way technology has changed, that things move fast, deliver fast, all this from this old box product world where it was monthly, seasonal cycles. So in order to actually, your business and your capabilities to move that fast, you need a solid foundation. And without a solid foundation, you'll get bogged down fixing things, finding them late in the cycle, all this stuff costly, and you'll end up spinning on all these problems that you should easily identify, detect early and fix. So I find that a key principle of SRE is that this is where the consultancy role comes in and helping other teams grow and get better. So that leads to this, feeds the big transition that's changed from box product to cloud, and it's only going to accelerate and go faster, to be honest.
So one of the reasons that I came back to Microsoft from fairly successful career in the European startup space was that the one thing I haven't done in terms of my own kind of SRE career is really large scale. So kind of riffing off a point you made earlier about the fact that reliability or SRE is really for any company of any size. I categorically agree and support that, and have actually made my career on that basis. And for me, the last step, so to speak, is to come back to Microsoft and do SRE at this planet scale that we have here. So I'm really excited to be here, but then specifically, you know, the product group that we're in, James and I are doing SharePoint Online. And what's really interesting about that for me is that, you know, the history of the product, right? We have lines of code in the code base more than 20 years old that are running in production in the cloud, critical to the service. And what that means is that as we try to make changes to things, you know, it's not a small glider or biplane, it is a huge jumbo jet. And it's actually in flight, and it has been for a very long time. And so while we try to do these things, you know, like, you know, retrofitting, you know, core pieces of the code or core functionality or core pieces of hardware and infrastructure, like I'm thinking about load balancers is on my mind right now. While we're trying to do these things, you know, the plane is in flight. You know, the customers are on board, and they're not new customers or small customers. These are people who've been buying and using our product for 10 or 15 years. So it literally is, you know, sometimes, you know, changing the wings on the aircraft while we're in the air. And that to me is where the excitement comes from. You know, that's why I came back to Microsoft, to have that experience doing it.